He's a South Texas high school football fixture, Carlos Enrico, longtime coach over at Central Catholic. And, Coach, always awesome when I get a chance to chat with you, although I know that we wish this particular conversation was under different circumstances. You're joining us to celebrate and remember Coach JT, John Torres, who in his own right kind of became a South Texas high school football fixture, coached at many different local programs along the way until his health would no longer allow him to. He passed this past week. And Coach, as his mentor and as his high school football coach at Central Catholic, I want to get your thoughts on Coach Torres as we celebrate and remember JT.
Well, JT was a special guy to me because he was my first quarterback when I took over as head coach, and I knew this kid was something special because we had a passing series that I got from Sonny Detmer, and one of the packages was it was called a 50s package. In other words, five guys going out, and he had to read it. And he got so good at that. And his senior year, I just gave him the green light, and I would call something, and then he would change it because he'd see something at the line of scrimmage. And that's when I knew this kid was going to be special. And he was special to me because he went into the coaching profession. I hired him right out he was going to St. Mary's at the time, and he got injured. And he came to see me, and I gave him a coaching job, and that was in 1990. And we happened to win the state championship that year, and I had 8 graduates out of the 10 coaches that I had. I had 8 of them, and he, at a young age, I knew he was going to be a good football coach because his insight into offense, his insight into reading defenses, and he was a smart young man. And I knew he could take the ball from the 20 and take it on in. He had that type of mentality offensively. So when he got his first head coaching job at South San, I knew that he was going to be a good coach.
That's interesting, Coach, that you gave him the green light at a time when offenses weren't doing what you just described, Coach. The late 80s, I mean, 5 guys going out, that's pretty routine nowadays. I mean, back in the 80s, that was transformative. Nobody else, outside of you mentioned Coach Detmer, nobody else is really doing that. So to put that kind of trust in a kid who's that young, and to be able to run an offense like that, I think it did speak to a lot about how much you trusted him, Coach.
Well, I remember his senior year, we had a game with MacArthur, and we had no business playing MacArthur. So I asked him, I said, hey, man, what do you think of going in the shotgun and spreading things out? And he goes, golly, Coach, that's great, So I remember talking to, I think Coach Osborne was a coach at MacArthur at the time, and he said, Coach, I'm not going to run up the score. I just want my son to set this record in receiving and all that. And so we talked before the game. I knew we were going to get killed. So they kicked off to us, and we spread them out. We hadn't done it all year. JT took it down, and we scored. We scored, Hector. It's 7-0. The crowd's going ballistic. And I remember Big Lou, rest in peace, Big Lou comes up. He was a defensive coordinator, and he goes, hey, Coach, I think we just pissed them off. And it ended up 50-7. But anyway, that's when I knew, hey, man, we can spread people out and start throwing the football, And so I went to a lot of clinics at University of Houston. And after JT moved on, we went to that spread offense and pretty successful with it.
Coach, you mentioned his head coaching stint at South San. He won a couple of district titles there at his time with the Bobcats. Had a stop at Southside in between leaving the central staff and when he ended up at South San. How much did he rely on you, Coach, when even when he did go to Southside and when he got to South San and got his head coaching job? How many phone calls, if you don't mind me asking, and text, or I guess this would be maybe before the days when text was how he communicated regularly, but how often would he lean on you on information as he advanced in his coaching career?
Well, I would hear from him almost every week until we played him that one year, and it was kind of weird. I didn't hear from him, but he called a lot for advice, and I tell you what, I I I would call him and congratulate him on every win that he had, and uh, he he was he hired a good staff that he had over there, and those guys were and just like typical JT. I mean, uh, he was very tough and very disciplined, and his teams were always prepared.
And then he moved on to Judson with a little bit of a gap in between their coach and a longtime assistant at Judson. And it's interesting because, like the Central Catholic culture, the Judson football culture it's tough to compare, but there is a similarity there in that very tight knit, a lot of pride there with what Judson's been able to accomplish over the last several decades. When he got to Judson, Coach, did that communication kind of continue? You know, because there he was competing year after year for state titles, and maybe though he wasn't the head coach, he was still an integral part of what they were trying to do in terms of trying to restore Rocket pride over there.
Well, he called me and he said, "Coach, I'm going to the University of Judson," and I was like, "Wow!" And so at first he was going to be, I think they labeled his position the passing coordinator. He was so happy when he got that job because the main thing he would tell me about was, "Hey, Coach, the difference between Judson, Southside, Central Catholic, any place is this: you lose a guy who runs a 4.3, and you get another one who's just as fast." He says there's 4 or 5 guys they're that deep, and you got over 200 and something 300 kids out for football. And he kept telling me what talent they had over there. So he basically he was in a gold mine, and he enjoyed it. He really did.
Awesome, Coach. And with the one thing that struck me, and full disclosure here, I was Coach JT was freshman and JV coach when I was there at Central, so I remember him well. Obviously, in helping us learn football, and you know how it is when kids get to Central, there's not a feeder program. At least back then there was no sense of a feeding program. You just went from a local Catholic school and you wanted to play football, so you learned how to play football. You weren't already playing in middle school for the most part. So he was responsible for teaching a lot of us the game. And so there's an affinity that his former players have for him, but there's also an affinity that fellow coaches have for him, Coach. I can't tell you how, and it's not surprising in hindsight, but how blown away I've been hearing from other coaches that maybe you wouldn't think automatically had crossed paths with JT, but he was a mentor to them. He was a friend to them. I mean, he had a close relationship with them. He's a guy that among the coaching fraternity, he stuck out. And I think that's saying a lot considering, how much you guys respect and admire each other. The fact that he stood out, I think, says a whole lot about it.
Well, I can't tell you, Hector, how many calls I got from his classmates, and most importantly, his coaching staff, his coaches, all the coaches, and coaches who didn't, and coaches who coached with him, and coaches who coached against him, and they all had the same thing. The phrase that I kept hearing was, "He was a good guy, and I remember also I got a tech from Suzette Areola, who was at Southside. She was his boss when she was over there, and she says she texts me right away, "Hey, Coach, and she says, I can't believe JT is in bad shape," and at the bottom of it she goes, "Oh, I love JT." And I can't tell you how many of those I got to, that a lot of people, a lot of coaches, it was like a fraternity of that was coming back my phone was blowing up. They wanted to know how he was doing, and so he was well liked by a lot of coaches.
He certainly was, Coach. We appreciate the time, and if you would like to leave us with a JT story, a JT memory, what JT means to you personally, whatever you would like to do, Coach, we'd love to end the interview that way as we pay respect to JT and Coach John Torres, as we've talked about, a guy who was very well respected and very well liked in the entire greater San Antonio community.
Well, Hector, I will say this. He suffered a lot. He really did. And I can't tell you how many times I visited him in the hospital, and it was heart-wrenching to me when I saw him starting to deteriorate and not be JT. The best thing that happened was that he passed away on Good Friday, and his sister was telling me that that was a thing that they were praying for, that God takes him quick so he don't have to stop suffering. And one of the things before he passed away that he related to me was how he lost his best friend, which was his dad. And the first thing that came to my mind when I got that text that morning that he passed away was that now he's with his best friend. And he's up there with Big Lou and all the other coaches that passed away, and his classmates, etc., and especially his dad. So God's got a hell of a team up there now.
He sure does. And I realize we haven't mentioned it over the course of it because we're so intent on celebrating his life, but he was battling lupus here for several years. And to your point about how it was tough there toward the end. Coach Enrico, we certainly appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Hector. I really appreciate it. Thanks, buddy.